Jessica Boynton's name should have been forgotten long ago. Just another small town tragedy. But the night she was found bleeding and locked inside her own closet turned her into the woman who survived the impossible. Her husband, Officer Matthew Boynton, called it a suicide. The evidence called it something else. And what Jessica remembered when she woke up made it clear. Someone had tried to erase her, and the person meant to protect her might have been the one who pulled the trigger. The night of April 15th in Griffin, Georgia, began like any other. The streets were quiet, the houses dim, and only the occasional hum of a passing car disturbed the silence. But around 10:45 p.m., that calm was shattered by the sound of police radios crackling through the dark. A 911 call had just come in from Officer Matthew Boynton, reporting that his wife, Jessica, had locked herself in their bedroom closet with a gun. Moments later, a gunshot echoed through the line. When responding officers arrived at the Boynton apartment, they found the front door unlocked and Matthew standing outside, pale and shaking, insisting he had tried to get her out but couldn't. Inside, the scene looked like something torn from a nightmare. Jessica, a 19-year-old mother of two, lay motionless in the cramped closet. Blood covered her hair and neck, and beside her was a small revolver. The air smelled sharp metallic, the scent of gunpowder and panic. Officers quickly called for medical help, believing she was already gone. Then, one of them noticed something. Jessica's chest was still rising and falling, faintly but unmistakably. She was alive. As paramedics worked frantically, neighbors gathered outside, whispering among themselves. Many knew Jessica as quiet and polite, the kind of young mother who smiled at strangers while pushing a stroller. Few realized how much turmoil brewed inside that home. Her marriage to Matthew, a newly minted police officer, had been strained for months. Friends said she'd been distant lately, scared even, but no one imagined it would come to this. She had two little boys she adored and plans to start fresh, away from the suffocating control she'd endured. Investigators began their work immediately, treating the incident as a possible suicide attempt. Matthew told them Jessica had sent him a message saying she couldn't go on. He said he tried to get inside when she stopped answering, but the closet door was locked. He claimed he forced it open only after hearing the gunshot. It was a clean, simple story. Too simple, some thought. The details started to pull apart almost immediately. The closet door had an old-fashioned keyhole that could only be locked from the outside. The gun, Matthew's police-issued weapon, was found several inches from Jessica's hand, as if it had been placed there rather than dropped. Her injuries, too, didn't quite match a self-inflicted wound. The bullet's path was oddly angled. Yet, because she was still breathing, officers focused on keeping her alive rather than preserving every trace of evidence. At the hospital, doctors fought to stabilize her, calling it a miracle when she survived the night. The news spread quickly through the department and the small Georgia community. To most people, the story was clear: a young woman, overwhelmed by marital struggles, had tried to take her own life. But those closest to Jessica weren't convinced. Her cousin later told reporters that Jessica had packed bags that very day, planning to leave Matthew for good. She had told friends she was scared but determined. As detectives sifted through the apartment, something about the atmosphere felt wrong, as if the scene had been arranged rather than discovered. There were no fingerprints on the weapon, except a faint smudge that couldn't be identified. Matthew's phone showed multiple deleted messages from the hour before the incident. And in the background of one of Jessica's final text messages, investigators could see something chilling: the timestamp didn't match Matthew's version of events. Jessica remained in a coma for several days, hovering between life and death. Doctors couldn't say if she'd ever wake up or remember what happened. But when she finally opened her eyes, confusion filled the room. She couldn't speak clearly yet, but the look in her eyes said everything: disbelief, fear, and a truth no one seemed ready to hear. The people around her thought they knew what had happened. But Jessica knew something they didn't: she hadn't pulled the trigger. When Jessica regained consciousness, the world around her felt like a blur of white light, hospital beeps, and murmured voices she couldn't place. Her head throbbed with pain, her memory came in fragments, and every breath reminded her how close she had come to dying. Doctors and nurses treated her like a miracle, calling her survival something they'd never seen before. The police, however, had already decided what had happened. In their reports, Jessica Boynton had tried to end her own life. But as her strength returned, so did her memories, and with them came doubts that grew louder each passing day. She couldn't remember everything, but pieces floated back like snapshots. The argument, Matthew's anger, the sound of her phone being taken, his voice cold and steady, saying something she couldn't quite repeat. Then a flash, a deafening crack, and nothing but darkness. Those images terrified her, yet they didn't fit the story everyone else believed. When she asked what happened, the nurses avoided eye contact, She was told she'd been found in a locked closet with a gun beside her. That explanation made no sense to her. She had never touched a gun that night. As Jessica lay recovering, investigators went through her belongings. Her phone, which had supposedly contained a goodbye message, revealed something odd. The text to Matthew had been sent after she was already unconscious. The timestamps contradicted his account, and when police analyzed the phone's location data, it showed it hadn't moved from the apartment at all. That meant the message couldn't have come from Jessica while she was alive and conscious. Someone else had used her phone. Matthew maintained his composure through every question, calmly repeating his story to investigators and colleagues. He said Jessica had been distant lately, that she'd threatened to hurt herself before, and that he was heartbroken but relieved she was alive. His fellow officers sympathized, calling it a tragic domestic incident. But a few of them couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. Jessica's family pushed for answers. They knew her better than anyone and swore she would never harm herself. She had been planning to leave, yes, but she was looking forward to starting over. Her cousin had messages saved where Jessica wrote about finding an apartment, a new job, and finally being free. If she truly intended to die, why was she making plans for a new life? When Jessica was strong enough to speak again, she told detectives she didn't believe it was a suicide attempt. She remembered arguing with Matthew before blacking out. She didn't remember touching the gun or hearing it fire. Her statement should have changed everything, but instead, the case seemed to stall. Evidence was sitting in the department's hands, yet no one pushed further. It was as if her words didn't matter. Then, strange details started surfacing. A neighbor recalled hearing 2 thuds before the gunshot. Another claimed to have seen Matthew pacing outside the apartment long before the 911 call was made. And when a technician analyzed the gun, they noticed something even more unsettling. There were no clear fingerprints, not even Matthew's, as though it had been wiped clean. Despite all of this, the department insisted the case remained consistent with a suicide attempt. Officially, the matter was closed. But privately, whispers began to circulate through Griffin. Officers who once called Matthew a friend started avoiding him. Some spoke quietly about missing evidence and gaps in the timeline. Jessica, now out of the hospital, faced the grim truth that her life had become a story others were trying to rewrite. The person who had nearly taken everything from her was walking free, still wearing a badge. Each night, as she stared at her reflection, she wondered not only why she had survived, but what she was meant to do with the truth that no one seemed willing to hear. And deep down, she feared the worst, that the man sworn to protect her had also tried to erase her. Weeks after Jessica left the hospital, the investigation that should have uncovered the truth began to unravel. The police department quietly returned to routine, and Matthew Boynton resumed work on light duty. To the public, it appeared the case was settled. A troubled wife, a tragic attempt, and a husband who had done all he could. But behind closed doors, whispers grew louder among officers who had seen the scene firsthand. Something didn't make sense, and those who looked too closely felt the pressure to stop asking questions. Jessica was trying to rebuild her life, yet she couldn't escape the shadows of that night. Every detail she remembered contradicted the version written into the official report. She started keeping her own notes, collecting what little evidence she could access. Friends helped her document inconsistencies: photographs of the closet door lock that only worked from the outside, records of the deleted text messages, and a timeline that placed Matthew in the apartment longer than he had admitted. The deeper she looked, the more everything pointed toward one conclusion. Someone had tried to stage her death. A detective who had doubts requested the crime scene to be re-examined. He noticed the blood spatter pattern didn't match where Jessica was found. The bullet's trajectory was angled downward, suggesting she had been sitting or even crouched when the gun went off, not standing as the report described. And there were faint wipe marks on the weapon, as though someone had cleaned it before placing it beside her. Despite these findings, superiors dismissed the concerns as inconclusive. The department had no desire for scandal, especially one involving one of their own officers. Jessica's recovery was slow but steady. Her memory sharpened, and fragments of that night returned more clearly. She remembered the tone of Matthew's voice, calm yet threatening, and the feeling of being trapped in that small closet. She remembered hearing her children cry from the next room. It wasn't a suicide attempt, it was something far more terrifying. When she tried to share her story publicly, she was warned to stop. Anonymous calls told her to move on, that reopening the case would ruin lives, including her own. Meanwhile, Matthew continued presenting himself as a victim. He told co-workers he'd been unfairly accused, that Jessica's head injury had made her confused. He moved out of their apartment and started seeing another woman. When Internal Affairs reviewed his conduct, They found minor policy violations but nothing criminal. The department officially cleared him. But then a break came from an unexpected source. A digital forensics specialist reviewing old data from Jessica's phone uncovered traces of deleted messages between Matthew and another woman. Those texts revealed he had been planning to leave Jessica and was worried about how it would look for his career. One message, sent just days before the shooting, read that everything would be easier if she was gone. It wasn't enough for a conviction, but it painted a chilling picture of motive. Public interest reignited. News outlets began covering Jessica's story, questioning how a case with so many irregularities could be ruled a suicide attempt. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation stepped in to re-examine certain elements. But even their involvement couldn't untangle the damage done during the initial investigation. Key evidence was lost, including the clothing Jessica wore that night and a section of the closet door splintered during entry. Despite all the setbacks, Jessica refused to stop. She met with lawyers, spoke to reporters, and demanded accountability. Each new revelation made the case harder to ignore, but it also made her a target of criticism and disbelief. Some accused her of seeking attention, while others believed every word. Yet the more she spoke, the clearer it became that the truth had been buried deliberately. In the end, the grand jury's decision arrived like a gut punch, no charges. The official ruling remained, attempted suicide. For Jessica, it wasn't just injustice, it was erasure. She had survived something no one believed, and the person she feared most was now free, wearing a badge, protected by silence and power. And though her body had healed, her faith in justice never would. Months turned into a year, but Jessica couldn't let the case go. She tried to live normally, working part-time, raising her boys, and pretending to move forward. Yet every quiet moment brought her back to the same questions. Why did the evidence vanish? Why had no one been held accountable? And how could the truth be so clear to her but invisible to those in power? She wasn't looking for revenge anymore, only acknowledgement of what had been done to her. But in Griffin, Georgia, the moment you spoke against the police department, you became an outsider. Reporters began taking interest again, drawn by the inconsistencies in the original investigation. Jessica agreed to speak on camera, her voice steady but her hands trembling. She described the night she nearly died and the long silence that followed. Her words were calm, not angry, but they hit harder than any accusation. People started to listen. Local newspapers ran stories highlighting the questionable handling of evidence, the lack of charges, and the unexplained gaps in Matthew's timeline. For the first time, the story of the cop's wife who shot herself began to sound less like tragedy and more like conspiracy. Matthew, meanwhile, continued his life without consequence. He was seen around town with his new girlfriend, confident and composed, as if the past had already been rewritten. When the department faced public criticism, they closed ranks. They described the investigation as thorough and fair, accusing the media of twisting facts. Behind closed doors, though, some officers privately admitted the case had been mishandled. One even leaked an internal memo showing that certain crime scene photos had gone missing before the grand jury review. The mounting public pressure forced the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to quietly re-examine the case. Forensic experts analyzed what little evidence remained and concluded the physical layout of the scene didn't match a suicide attempt. The trajectory of the bullet, the blood pattern, and the position of the gun were all inconsistent with Jessica firing it herself. But without the missing evidence and with so much time passed, it was impossible to prove beyond doubt who had pulled the trigger. It was the kind of uncertainty that protected the guilty. Then, a new witness surfaced, a neighbor who lived in the apartment next door. She said she had seen Matthew come home far earlier than he originally claimed. Her account was supported by surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store, showing his car returning home nearly 40 minutes before his official timeline. That revelation shattered his credibility, yet it still wasn't enough to reopen the case formally. Prosecutors argued that too many questions remained unanswered, and no clear proof of intent could be shown. Jessica's frustration deepened. The justice system she once believed in now felt like a locked door, just like the closet she had been trapped in. But rather than give up, she turned her pain into purpose. She began speaking at domestic abuse awareness events, telling her story to women who saw themselves in her struggle. She encouraged victims to document everything, to trust their instincts, and to fight even when no one believed them. Her courage inspired others, but it also brought unwanted attention. Anonymous emails and threats reminded her that some people still wanted her silent. Despite it all, Jessica stayed firm. She believed that if she couldn't have justice, she could at least have truth. Her story spread beyond Georgia, appearing on national news segments and podcasts. Every retelling added new layers of doubt to the official narrative. The phrase "unexplainable case" became attached to her name, a symbol of both mystery and failure in a system designed to protect its own. Matthew avoided the spotlight, refusing all interviews and hiding behind official statements. His silence said more than words ever could. Jessica, however, never stopped speaking. The more she talked, the more the public began to realize that her survival wasn't the ending of a tragedy, but the beginning of a reckoning. And though the authorities still clung to the story of an attempted suicide, the evidence, what little remained, told another story, one that refused to die no matter how many times it was buried. Years passed, and the small town that once whispered about Jessica Boynton's suicide attempt began to forget. New cases filled the headlines, new scandals took the public's attention, and the story of the young mother found in her closet faded into rumor. But Jessica carried it with her every day, the weight of survival pressing on her shoulders like a secret she couldn't set down. Her scars had healed, her voice had grown stronger, yet her faith in justice was gone. She knew the truth, but she had learned the hard way that truth alone was never enough. She built a new life in quiet determination. Her sons were growing, her work helping other survivors of domestic violence became her anchor, and her story reached beyond Georgia. Documentaries, podcasts, and news specials revisited her case, each one questioning how a woman could be shot in the head, survive, and still be told she did it to herself. Jessica didn't watch them anymore. She didn't need to relive it. But she hoped that every time her name was spoken, someone out there, some woman trapped in fear, would realize it was possible to survive and speak out. Matthew Boynton had moved on too. He left Griffin, remarried, and started a new family. His police career ended quietly after another internal investigation over unrelated misconduct. But he never faced criminal charges for what happened to Jessica. In interviews years later, he continued to deny everything. He said the case had ruined his life, that he was the real victim. Those who believed him saw Jessica as unstable, ungrateful, and vindictive. Those who believed her saw him as the symbol of a system built to protect itself. The divide never closed. Over time, pieces of the mystery resurfaced in unexpected ways. A retired detective who had worked the case gave an interview admitting that some evidence had been handled improperly. Another officer revealed he had been told not to question Matthew too harshly. Even one of the original forensic examiners confessed that the bullet hole and gun position never made sense, but that the department wanted it done. It wasn't proof, just confirmation had always known. The truth had been buried to protect a badge. Despite the injustice, Jessica's resilience became her greatest act of defiance. She turned her pain into purpose, helping other victims document abuse, navigate restraining orders, and face the fear of speaking out. She began traveling to small towns across the state, telling her story not as a victim, but as a survivor of silence. Her courage drew others out of the dark. Women wrote letters saying her story saved their lives. It didn't erase what she'd lost, but it gave her a reason to keep fighting. Still, there were nights when the memories returned without warning. The smell of metal, the flash of light, the sound of her own heartbeat pounding against silence. Those moments reminded her that she had lived through something no one should ever have to. And though she couldn't prove what happened that night, she knew the truth would always exist, unwritten but undeniable. The apartment where it all happened was eventually rented to someone new. The walls were repainted, the floors replaced, the closet door fixed. To strangers, it was just another quiet home on a quiet street. But for those who remembered, it carried an invisible scar, a reminder of how easily facts can be rewritten when the powerful are the ones holding the pen. Jessica never stopped hoping that someday, evidence would surface that would finally expose what really happened. Maybe a confession, maybe a lost file, maybe just someone brave enough to speak. Until then, she lived with the reality that her case would forever remain one of those haunting, unfinished stories, known not for answers, but for questions no one could explain. And so the story of Jessica Boynton endures, not as a closed chapter but as a warning, a reminder that justice can be delayed, truth can be hidden, and yet survival itself can be a rebellion. Her life became proof that even when everything is taken from you, your voice, your safety, your truth, rising again is the one thing no one can cover up. And when people still ask what really happened that night in the closet, the only honest answer remains the same: it's unexplainable.